I bought that piano the way I bought most things back then, which is to say, without near enough thought and a great deal more hope than sense. Looking back, I understand now that the piano itself was never really the thing I was buying. I was buying an idea of what my saloon might become. And it would take me the better part of 2 months to understand that the idea I actually wanted had a name and calluses on her hands, and a secret she guarded closer than any lawman's badge. The piano came off a freight wagon from Cheyenne on a Tuesday in April, purchased sight unseen at auction from a bankrupt hotel 2 towns over, and I paid a foolish sum to have it hauled the last 30 miles over roads that weren't fit for anything heavier than a light buggy. I told myself, watching 4 men strain and curse to get it through the saloon's double doors, that a piano would draw a better class of customer than the rough trail hands and cattle drovers who made up most of my regular trade. That music, any music, might be the thing to nudge my establishment from a place men came to drink toward a place men might bring their wives on a Saturday evening, respectable enough that decent folks wouldn't cross the street to avoid walking past my door. It did not work out that way, not at first. I could not play a note myself beyond a clumsy version of a hymn I half remembered from childhood, and neither could anyone else who tried their hand at it over the following weeks, a parade of drunk cowhands banging out something that resembled music only if you were charitable and considerably more whiskey-soaked than sober judgment would recommend. The piano sat in the corner of my saloon for 2 full months, a handsome piece of furniture and nothing more, gathering dust and the occasional spilled drink, until I had privately begun to consider it the worst investment of my adult life. I remember Bertie teasing me about it more than once, wiping down the bar while some cattle drover mangled his way through a tune nobody could quite name, telling me I'd have done better spending that freight money on a second icebox or a proper set of curtains for the windows facing the street. I didn't have a good answer for her teasing, only a stubborn conviction that the piano would eventually earn its keep, though I couldn't have told you in those early weeks exactly what form that earning might take. Larrabee was, in those days, a town still deciding what kind of place it wanted to become, rough enough that most saloons catered exclusively to trail hands and drovers passing through, but with enough families settling permanently that a few of us had begun to wonder whether there might be a market for something a little more respectable, a place a man might bring his wife on occasion, without either of them feeling out of place. Clara Bennett did the town's washing. She'd arrived in Larrabee some 8 months before I bought that piano, taking over the laundry business from an aging widow who'd wanted to retire back east. And she'd settled into that particular unremarkable niche a town affords, a quiet, hard-working woman who keeps to herself and asks nothing of anyone beyond fair payment for honest labor. I knew her only the way most of the town knew her, by the crisp, careful fold of a returned shirt, by a polite but reserved nod exchanged on the boardwalk, by the general understanding that she was pleasant enough but not given to lingering conversation, a woman who seemed, if you looked closely, to be carrying something she had no intention of setting down in front of anyone. I did not know that spring that Clara Bennett had grown up in a fine house in Boston with a piano tutor twice a week from the age of 6, that she had once played for rooms full of people in silk and lace who applauded politely and never once asked whether the music brought her any real joy or whether the whole arrangement was simply one more decoration in a life being carefully assembled around her without much regard for what she herself might have wanted from it. I did not know that she had been raised to consider marriage the natural, inevitable culmination of that carefully assembled life, a business arrangement dressed in white lace, or that she had fled 2 nights before her own wedding with nothing but a single trunk and enough money carefully saved and hidden over the preceding year to carry her as far west as the trains and stagecoaches would take her. She came to collect a load of linens from the saloon one evening in June, later than her usual hour, well past when Bertie had already gone home and most of my regular trade had drifted off towards supper. I was alone behind the bar doing the evening's reckoning of accounts, and I did not notice her pause at the piano on her way toward the door, laundry basket balanced against her hip, until I heard the first notes. I want to describe what it sounded like, though I have never found words quite equal to the task. It was not the clumsy hymn fragments I'd grown accustomed to from every other hand that had touched those keys. It was something whole and deliberate and achingly beautiful. A piece I didn't recognize then, and have since learned was a nocturne, played with a fluency and feeling that made the whole saloon feel, for the span of those few minutes, like an entirely different room than the one I'd built with my own hands and my own limited imagination. I set down the ledger I'd been working through without any memory of deciding to do so. My pen still uncapped, ink slowly drying on a half-finished column of figures I would have to redo later because I could not, for the life of me, remember what number I'd been about to write. The saloon around us had gone strange and unfamiliar in the low evening light. The same rough log walls and scarred floorboards I saw every day of my life transformed, however briefly, into something that felt worth the name I'd given the place when I built it, the Golden Bird. An ambitious name for what had mostly been, until that evening, a fairly ordinary drinking establishment. I did not interrupt her. I stood perfectly still behind my own bar, afraid that any sound I made might startle her into stopping, and I watched her play with an intensity I had not expected of myself. This quiet laundress transformed entirely by the simple act of her hands moving across those keys, her eyes closed, her whole careful, reserved posture loosened into something I hadn't known she possessed. She stopped abruptly when she finally noticed me watching, her hands freezing mid-phrase, her face going through something complicated and swift. Embarrassment, I think, and something closer to fear, before settling into a careful blankness I recognized, having worn something similar myself often enough, as the particular mask of a person caught somewhere they hadn't meant to be seen. I remember thinking, in that frozen moment before either of us spoke, how strange it was that a woman could be so entirely transformed by music one instant and so thoroughly guarded the next, as though two quite different people occupied the same careful frame. "I apologize," she said, already rising, already reaching for her laundry basket as though she meant to flee the moment the words left her. "I shouldn't have touched it without asking." "Don't apologize," I said, more urgently than I intended, setting down the bar towel I'd been absently folding and refolding without noticing. "Please. That was the finest thing I heard in this room since I opened its doors." She did not answer that directly. She only gathered her basket and left with a hurried politeness that told me, more clearly than any words could have, that whatever I had just witnessed was not meant for an audience, and that she would likely avoid my saloon entirely rather than risk being caught at those keys again. I thought about that moment for days afterward, turning it over in a way a man turns over any puzzle he can't quite solve. I did not understand, not yet, why a woman with a gift like that would spend her days scrubbing other people's linens in a town 2,000 miles from wherever she'd learned to play that way, or why she seemed so thoroughly frightened of being seen doing the one thing, by the evidence of my own ears, she was truly extraordinary at. I found myself in those days watching for her on the boardwalk with an attentiveness I hadn't paid to any woman in some years, though I told myself at the time it was mere curiosity and nothing more. It was Bertie, my cook and closest confidant in that town, who finally coaxed the beginning of an explanation out of me, noticing I'd gone unusually quiet and distracted over the following week. When I told her what I'd witnessed, she was quiet a long moment, wiping flour from her hands before she said, plain and unhurried, "Some folks come west to build something new, Tom. Others come west to bury something they couldn't carry any farther. Might be our Miss Bennet's a bit of both." I did not see Clara at the piano again for nearly 3 weeks, though I left it uncovered and in tune, a quiet invitation I wasn't certain she'd ever notice or accept, dusting it myself each morning rather than leaving that small task to Bertie, a habit I couldn't quite explain to myself at the time. When she finally did return to it, late on a Thursday evening, much like the first time, I made a point of staying well back near the far end of the bar, giving her whatever distance she needed to feel safe enough to play. She noticed me there within a few minutes, I could tell by the slight hesitation in her hands, but she did not stop this time, only continued, some silent permission passing between us that neither of us spoke aloud. That became, over the following weeks, an unspoken arrangement we both honored without ever formally agreeing to it. She came most Thursday evenings after her last deliveries and well after my rowdier trade had thinned towards supper, and she played for perhaps half an hour, sometimes longer, while I kept a respectful distance and let the music fill a saloon that had never before, in all my years running it, held anything so purely beautiful within its rough log walls. Bertie noticed the pattern of it before I fully admitted it to myself, catching me more than once lingering near closing on a Thursday evening with an excuse about accounts that needed finishing, when in truth I'd simply arranged my whole week around the hope that Clara might come play. She teased me gently about it at first, then, when I continued denying anything particular was happening, stopped teasing altogether, and instead began quietly making sure the saloon was tidy and the good lamp oil was in stock every Thursday afternoon, a small conspiracy of preparation neither of us ever discussed aloud, but both of us understood perfectly well. "You're a fool if you let that woman keep thinking she's only welcome here for the piano," Bertie told me once, flour dusting her forearms as she kneaded dough for the following day's bread. "A person can tell the difference, Tom, between a man who likes the music and a man who's fallen for the woman making it." I did not have a ready answer for that observation, mostly because I suspected she was entirely correct, and I wasn't yet prepared to say so aloud, even to myself. I began, over those summer weeks, to notice things about Clara Bennett beyond her extraordinary hands. The particular way she held herself very upright, even doing laundry, as though some old instruction about posture had never quite left her body. The careful, precise way she spoke, choosing each word with a deliberation that suggested either great caution or an education far beyond what her current circumstances would suggest. The single fine possession she seemed to carry with her always, a small silver locket she wore beneath her collar, which I caught sight of only once when a loose thread had pulled her collar askew, and which she tucked quickly back out of sight the moment she noticed my glance. I noticed, too, the particular way she handled money when settling her laundry accounts each week, counting coins with a precision that seemed almost mathematical, never once shortchanged and never once shortchanging in return, a scrupulous fairness that struck me as belonging to a woman who had, at some point in her life, needed to prove her own honesty to people inclined to doubt it. I noticed she read, when she had a spare hour, books that seemed considerably weightier than the dime novels and farming almanacs most of the town favored. I glimpsed a worn copy of some French novel once, tucked into her laundry basket, and though I couldn't read a word of the language myself, the sight of it told me something about the education she'd left mostly hidden beneath her plain gray work dresses. I did not ask her about any of it. I had learned enough by then about the particular etiquette of frontier towns full of people running from one thing or another to understand that pressing a person for the story behind their reserve was rarely welcome and rarely wise. Instead, I simply kept the piano tuned, kept the bar quiet on Thursday evenings, and let whatever fragile trust was building between us build at whatever pace she needed it to. The first real turning point came in August, when the town decided to hold a proper social to celebrate the completion of the new schoolhouse, and half the committee, knowing about the piano even if they knew nothing of Clara's secret talent, came to me asking whether I might arrange for some music. I thought of Clara immediately. And I thought, too, of how much courage it would take to ask her to play, not for an empty saloon on a quiet Thursday evening, but for the whole assembled town. I asked her anyway, one Thursday evening after she'd finished playing, my heart going harder than I expected over such a simple request. She was quiet a long moment, her hands still resting on the keys, before she said, "You don't know what you're asking, Tom. If I play in front of the whole town, plainly and publicly, word travels. Word always travels. And there are people back east who would very much like to know where I've gotten to." That was the first time she'd said anything at all about a past beyond Larrabee. And I understood, hearing the fear plain in her voice, that whatever she was running from carried real weight and real danger. Not merely the ordinary embarrassment of an unconventional woman's secret talent. I told her I wouldn't press her to play if it meant putting her at risk, and I meant it entirely, though some small selfish part of me was disappointed at the thought of the town never getting to hear what I'd been privileged to hear these past weeks. A disappointment I kept carefully to myself, understanding it was mine to manage and not hers to soothe. She surprised me 2 days later by telling me she would play after all. One song at the social, nothing more. Because, she said, she had spent 8 months in Larrabee hiding every part of herself that mattered, and she had grown tired, in a way she hadn't quite realized until I'd asked, of being only half a person in the town she'd chosen to call home. I remember the particular steadiness in her voice as she said it, a resolve that seemed to have settled into her overnight, as though naming the fear aloud had somehow loosened its grip on her. The schoolhouse social was by any measure the finest evening my saloon had ever hosted. Half the town crowded in for lemonade and cake rather than whiskey, children darting between the tables while their mothers arranged flowers on every available surface, and their fathers stood awkwardly in their good coats, clearly unaccustomed to seeing my establishment dressed up for anything so wholesome. I had spent the better part of 2 days scrubbing the place top to bottom, moving the gaming tables out to the back room, arranging borrowed chairs in careful rows facing the piano, and I remember feeling a nervousness that evening entirely disproportionate to the simple fact of hosting a town social, though I understood, watching Clara arrive in her better blue dress, exactly where that nervousness had come from. When Clara sat down at that piano in her better blue dress with the small lace collar, hands trembling only slightly, and began to play, I watched the whole room fall into the same stunned silence I'd felt that first evening alone behind my bar. Even the children stopped their darting about, drawn by some instinct toward the sound. And I watched more than one weathered rancher's face go soft and unguarded in a way I'd never seen from men who spent most of their public hours carefully composed against any show of feeling. She played beautifully, of course, exactly as beautifully as I'd known she would. And when she finished, the applause was long and genuine, hats waving and Birdie openly wiping her apron with her hands. And I watched something ease in Clara's posture that I hadn't realized until that moment had been tensed and guarded the entire 8 months I'd known her. Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the mercantile and considered herself the town's foremost authority on respectable culture, declared loudly enough for half the room to hear that she hadn't witnessed playing of that caliber since a concert she had attended in St. Louis some 15 years prior, and asked, with the particular bluntness small-town curiosity always seems to grant itself, wherever Miss Bennet had learned to play so remarkably well. Clara answered only that she'd had the good fortune of an early education, offering nothing further, and I watched her deflect the follow-up questions with a practiced grace that told me she'd fielded such curiosity before and knew precisely how much to reveal and how much to hold carefully back. The dark turn came exactly 9 days later, when a stranger in a fine black suit far too clean for our dusty streets rode into Larrabee and began asking, careful and polite, whether anyone in town had seen a woman answering to a particular description. Dark auburn hair, gray-blue eyes, fine-boned features, likely going by a false name, likely working some humble trade to keep herself hidden and unremarkable. His name was Harlan Voss, And he made no secret of his purpose once he'd confirmed, through careful questioning at the mercantile and the boarding house, that he had indeed found the woman he'd been hired to find. I learned later that he'd been at this particular search for the better part of 4 months, working his way westward through a list of towns where a runaway woman of Clara's description and education might have plausibly settled, and that Larrabee had been, by his own account, only the 11th town on that list, though he seemed entirely unsurprised to have finally found what he was looking for, a man clearly accustomed to patient, methodical work paying off eventually. He came to my saloon that same evening, cane tapping deliberately against my floorboards, and told me plainly, over a whiskey I served him with hands that wanted badly to shake, that Miss Clara Bennett was in fact Miss Clara Whitfield of Boston, daughter of a prominent shipping family who had fled 2 nights before her own wedding to a man named Reginald Ashworth, a business partner of her father's, whose fortune and standing had made him, by every outward measure, an excellent match, and whose private cruelties, Voss admitted with something almost like distaste, had apparently made him something considerably less than excellent in private. Her family wants her found and brought home, Voss said, turning his whiskey glass slowly between gloved fingers without drinking from it. Whatever her personal feelings about Mr. Ashworth, the arrangement between the families remains, from a business perspective, very much intact, and her father is prepared to be generous with anyone who assists in her safe return. I told him, with more heat than good sense probably recommended, that Clara Bennett was a grown woman capable of deciding her own future, and that whatever arrangement existed between her father and Mr. Ashworth was not, in my understanding, any business of mine or his to enforce against her will. Voss only smiled thinly at that, the smile of a man well accustomed to being told no by people who did not yet understand how little their objections mattered against the weight of money and family standing arrayed against them. I found Clara that same night, walking fast through the growing dark to her small rented room above the mercantile, and I watched her face go white and still when I told Voss's name and what he'd said. "How much time do I have?" she asked. Already I could see, beginning to calculate what she could carry and how quickly she could disappear again, the particular practiced calculation of a woman who had clearly done this once before and dreaded, more than almost anything, having to do it again. I followed her up the narrow outside stairs to her room, and I watched her begin pulling a small trunk from beneath her bed with hands that had gone quick and efficient in a way I'd never seen from her before, folding what few possessions she owned with the same practiced speed I imagined she'd used the first time she'd fled Boston, a skill no woman should ever have needed to develop, but one she'd clearly mastered out of necessity. "You don't have to run," I told her. "Not from this town and not from me. Whatever this Ashworth did to you, whatever your father's arranged, none of it obligates you to anything you don't choose freely for yourself." "You don't understand how these things work, Tom," she said, and I heard real despair in her voice for the first time since I'd known her, her hands stilling for just a moment over the half-packed trunk. "My father has resources, reputation. The law, more often than not, sides with a wealthy man's claim over a woman's word about what happened behind closed doors. I ran because staying meant marrying a man who—" She stopped herself there, unable to finish, her hands pressed hard against her own arms, as though holding herself together by main force. I did not press her to finish that sentence. I understood enough from what she couldn't say to know the shape of what she was protecting herself from, and I told her, as steadily as I could manage, that I intended to stand between her and Harlan Voss for as long as she needed me to, whatever that required. I took the shirt she'd been folding gently from her hands and set it back down on the bed, and I told her that whatever decision she made about running or staying, I did not want it made in a panic at midnight with a trunk half packed, but in daylight, with a clear head, and with the knowledge that she had at least one person in Larrabee who would not let her face this alone. The revelation and turning point arrived together 3 days later, when Voss returned to my saloon with what he clearly believed was an unanswerable proposition, a letter from Clara's father himself, offering not merely to forgive her flight, but to release her entirely from the arranged marriage to Ashworth, provided only that she return home to Boston and allow the family to present her disappearance publicly as an extended visit to relations out west, sparing the family's reputation the scandal of a runaway daughter while sparing Clara the marriage she'd fled to avoid. Voss read the relevant portions of the letter aloud himself, standing at my bar with the particular satisfied bearing of a man certain he was about to succeed where months of searching had finally paid off, and I remember watching Clara's face as she listened, unable to tell in that moment which way her decision might fall. Her father's letter, by Voss's reading, was more contrite than I'd expected, acknowledging in careful formal language that he had perhaps not adequately considered his daughter's own wishes in arranging the Ashworth match, and expressing a genuine, if belatedly offered, desire to see her safely and happily settled, wherever that settling might occur. I watched Clara read that letter in my own saloon, the whole town's worth of gossip already swirling around Voss's arrival, and I understood, watching her hands tremble around the page, that this offer represented something she had likely never expected, a genuine, if imperfect, path back to the family and the life she'd left behind, without the specific cruelty of Ashworth attached to it. I stood a little apart while she read, giving her whatever space she needed to weigh a decision I understood, even then, was not truly mine to influence, however much some frightened, selfish part of me wanted to. "You could go home," I told her, though every word of it cost me more than I expected. "Truly home, without the marriage. I won't pretend that isn't worth considering." She looked up at me then, and I saw something settle in her expression that I hadn't seen before, a clarity that seemed to arrive all at once after weeks of fear and uncertainty. "Home," she said slowly, "was never really Boston, Tom. Home was a house full of people deciding my future for me before I'd had the chance to want anything for myself. I have spent 8 months in Larrabee doing my own washing and playing that piano for exactly as long as I chose to play it and for exactly the audience I chose to have. And I find I am considerably more myself in this small, dusty town than I ever was in that fine house." She wrote her father a careful letter that same week, thanking him for the offer and declining it plainly, informing him that she intended to remain in Larrabee of her own choosing, and that she hoped, in time, he might come to understand a daughter's happiness as worth more than a family's convenient reputation. She read the letter aloud to me before sealing it, her voice steady and clear despite the weight of what she was choosing. And I remember thinking, listening to her, that I had never in my life heard anyone speak with such plain, unshakable certainty about a decision that had cost her so dearly to arrive at. Voss left town 3 days later, his purpose unfulfilled, though he told me, on his way out, with something that might almost have been respect, that he'd rarely seen a woman hold her ground so plainly against pressure that had broken considerably stronger people. A compliment that struck me as strange coming from a man whose whole profession depended on precisely the kind of pressure Clara had just refused to bend beneath. I asked Clara to marry me on a Thursday evening in October after she'd finished playing, the saloon otherwise empty, the piano's last notes still hanging in the quiet air between us. I had thought in the days leading up to it that I might wait for some more suitable occasion, some evening with flowers arranged and a proper speech rehearsed. But sitting there watching her hands finally still on the keys, I found I could not wait one evening longer to say what I'd been carrying for weeks. I did not have a grand speech prepared. I only told her, plain as I knew how, that I had fallen in love with her somewhere between that first startled evening and every Thursday since. That I did not need her to be anyone other than exactly who she'd shown herself to be across these months. A woman capable of extraordinary beauty and extraordinary courage both, sometimes within the same quiet hour. And that I would consider it the greatest privilege of my life if she'd let me spend the rest of it listening to her play. She was quiet a long moment after I finished, long enough that my heart began to sink toward the particular dread of a man who has just said something he cannot take back and isn't certain was welcome. Then she looked up at me, something bright and unguarded in her expression that I had only ever seen before while she played, and she said, "I have spent my whole life being asked to become whatever the people around me needed me to become. You are the first person who has ever simply asked me to stay exactly as I am." She said yes, with her hands still resting on the piano keys, and I have never, in all the years since, heard her play more beautifully than she did in the moments right after. Some piece I didn't recognize and never thought to ask the name of, because I understood, listening, that the music itself was answer enough. We were married that December, in the same saloon that piano had first come to sit untouched and unwanted for 2 long months. The whole town crowded in for the occasion, and Clara played the wedding march herself before handing the keys over to a hastily recruited substitute so she could walk the short distance to where I stood waiting. Bertie cried through the whole ceremony, unashamed, telling anyone who'd listen that she'd known something was building between us weeks before either of us had admitted it aloud, and I did not have the heart to argue with her, since she'd been entirely correct. Clara wrote to her father again the following spring, a longer letter this time, describing the small life she'd built in Larrabee, the saloon, the marriage, the piano she now played openly and without fear several evenings a week to a room that had come over time to consider her performances one of the finest attractions the town had to offer, drawing visitors from as far as 2 counties over on the evening's word spread she'd be playing. He wrote back eventually, stiff and formal at first, though the letters grew warmer across the following years, and Clara's mother visited once, 3 years into our marriage, staying a full month, and weeping on her final evening at how completely her daughter seemed to have found herself in a life so different from the one that had been planned for her. The piano sits in that same corner still, all these years later. No longer a curiosity nobody could properly play, but the beating heart of a saloon that slowly, gradually, became something closer to what I'd once hoped it might be. Not merely a place men came to drink, but a place where a woman, once too frightened to be fully seen, finally found a room willing to simply listen. She never asked me why I kept that piano through 2 full months of clumsy, tuneless failure, waiting for someone worth the waiting. I only ever told her, on the evenings she still asks, that some instruments simply need the right hands, and some hearts need the right patience, and that I had never once regretted the foolish sum I paid to bring either one into my life. I have thought more than once across the years since that the piano itself never really changed at all between the day it arrived on that freight wagon and the evening Clara first sat down to play it. The same strings, the same worn keys, the same handsome dark wood. What changed was simply the hands that finally found it, and the patience of a man foolish enough to keep believing, through 2 long, silent months, that the right hands would eventually come.